But first, it's truly remarkable that Treasury has had almost no input into the Morrison government's climate plan, even though it modelled Kevin Rudd's emissions trading scheme back in 2009, Julia Gillard's carbon tax in 2011, and overseas, the UK Treasury has just released its fully modelled British net zero plan. Here in Australia, we've got a glossy book that the PM waved around yesterday and a PowerPoint slideshow. Just the sort of extensive detail you'd want behind you, isn't it, to go ahead and junk Australia's standing as an energy superpower and the billions of export dollars that go with it. We've been told that the government's net zero by 2050 emissions target will add $2,000 to national incomes per person and create 62,000 new jobs by 2050 against business as usual. This from a Prime Minister whose party told us before the last election that Labor's 45% emissions cut by 2030 was going to cut wages by $9,000, eliminate 336,000 jobs and reduce total GDP by some $500 billion. Yet while a 45% cut by 2030 was economy wrecking, as this government told us then, this 100% cut by 2050 is now supposedly economy boosting. But having earlier reportedly assured National Party MPs that there would be no reduction in coal or gas export, it now seems that they're going to be down by at least 35%. And the 50,000 jobs that the coal industry now sustains, well, they're meant to be supplemented by just 16,000 jobs in so-called billionaire-driven green hydrogen. Now, forgive my scepticism, but if you're going to get to net zero by 2050 and it's supposedly this economic bonanza, why not just do it now? Bring it all forward. Harvest all these gains, the jobs, the billions of dollars, all of that now here immediately. Especially since, of course, the UK Treasury says that getting to net zero is still going to require a carbon price of $295 a tonne. Compare that to Julia Gillard's carbon tax of just $23 a tonne. Now, for bitter experience, we know that the more renewable and unreliable energy we have in this country, the more expensive and less reliable our power supply becomes. And we know from watching the crisis now in Britain and Europe that reliance on wind and solar doesn't actually keep the lights on or fire up the heating when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. So why should we be relaxed and comfortable about the government's so-called plan to get to net zero, which involves reducing fossil fuels to less than 15% of our power supply, when the green hydrogen that's supposed to substitute for existing baseload power is an entirely unproven technology at scale, especially since the UK Treasury modelling, well, it's based on wind-free days dropping to just 7 a year by 2050. Well, already there's been almost 70 wind-free days in the UK and it's only October. None of this adds up. It doesn't add up when you go through page and page and page of the detail, as I've done over the last few days. Maybe that's why the government doesn't want you to see the modelling. On net zero, I could live with it if the government really did have a credible plan to get there, the plan that the Prime Minister promised to give us at the National Press Club back in February. But the only proven way to deliver emissions-free baseload power is nuclear. And here we are saying it's okay to use it at sea and submarines, but somehow wrong to use it on land. Honestly, there's something pretty pathetic about a government that embraces a technology to power submarines, but not to power our cities or our manufacturing jobs when it's emissions-free. And on the assessment of people like Bill Gates and others, it's the only credible way to get to net zero that this government has now signed us up to. Now, when pressed, Scott Morrison said that he'd release the government's modelling eventually, but not now. Even though now is when he expects all of us to support his plan, that something might just turn up that'll cost us billions. It hasn't even been invented yet by 2050. Now, I absolutely accept that a Labor government would be even more emissions obsessed than a Liberal one. This is Not what anyone would have expected from a government first elected on a very different Prime Minister in 2013 by the quiet Australians who gave Scott Morrison his miracle win in 2019. How can very ambitious fantasy emissions cuts that was so wrong at the last election be so right now? That's the question that will dog this Prime Minister right up to polling day.